E.N.D here. Something that confuse a lot of players, especially new players, especially newbies, is the stack. The stack and how the stacks work. Even I, that I've been playing Magic the Gathering for many years, I think from 2003, even I sometimes have difficulty in using the stack. Which spells resolve first, which ability goes on the stack, and so on and so on. And today I decided to do a tutorial, a basic tutorial, this is not a professional tutorial about how the stack works. This video is for new players. If you are a professional player, if you know how the stack works, this will be very basic for you. But if you are new in Magic the Gathering and you want to know how the stack works, stay tuned to this video, because I'm going to give you examples, I'm going to give you scenarios how this stack works. First of all, I have this as to represent the stack. You don't need, if you're playing with your friends, to use this particular, it's a piece of paper with a print of stack. You don't need to use that, but this, if you are a new player, helps you a lot to understand how the stack works. First and foremost, in Magic the Gathering, you have lands. Lands, and without lands, you cannot cast spells. Therefore, let's use a couple of lands. You put a land in play, and the land never goes on the stack. Playing a land does not go on the stack. This is very important. So, if someone tells you you have to put the land on the stack, no, that is not allowed. If you're going to play a land, you put the land in play without hitting the stack. At this stage, when you play a land, the opponent cannot do nothing. The opponent can do something after you play the land. Now, once you play the land, you can cast a spell. And let's say we have a 1-drop, so you will tap the land. You will tap the land, and tapping for mana does not go on the stack. The tapping of mana does not go on the stack. So once you tap a land, the mana goes in your mana pool as soon as possible. It does not go on the stack, and at this stage there is no priority for your opponent. You tap the land, you get the mana, and you're going to resolve a spell. You put a spell in play. But when you play a spell, the spell does not go on the battlefield ASAP. The spell goes on the stack. At this stage, the opponent can respond to that spell. Because it's on the stack, the opponent can cast another spell as a response for that spell. In this case, we are in the initial stages of the game and your opponent does not have any mana, so the spell goes on the stack, your opponent does not respond, the spell resolves and goes in the battlefield. This is the basic interaction of the stack when you play basic. Let's play another scenario. Let's say we will drop another land. We'll drop a swamp. And I'm going to tap my 2 lands. And I'm going to play this particular spell, Tap River. As I said, tapping mana does not go on the stack, so I can play the spell immediately. The spell goes on the stack. Tap River says when it enters the battlefield, you amass 1. Your opponent has priority now. Your opponent can cast another spell in response. If he or she does not cast another spell, the spell resolves and hits the battlefield. As it hits the battlefield, because it says it enters the battlefield, amass 1, when it hits the battlefield, you need to amass 1. And because in my case, I don't have a zombie army. I have to create my zombie army, and the amass ability goes on the stack. The amass ability goes on the stack. At this stage, I'm going to use the zombie army as an example of the amass ability on the stack, but really and truly it's the amass ability, the +1/+1. At this stage, your opponent can respond. And if your opponent responds, he cannot respond on the zombie army because it's not in play yet, because that's the amass. If there is no response, the ability resolves and goes in play with a +1/+1 counter on it. Let's put a +1/+1 counter on it, and that's a 1/1 creature. Now, let's continue giving more example about how the stacks works. We will again put our lands untapped, and let's take another example that we have another Lasotop River and our amass army is at 3. Okay? So we have our army at 3 +1/+1 counters, and we're going to play another Lasotop River. Lasotop River, when it hits the battlefield, you amass again. You play the spell on the stack, but now, because when this hits the battlefield, your army will become a 4/4 creature, your opponent will respond with a Jaya's Greeting. Jaya's Greeting deals 3 damage to target creature, and you also scry 1. This spell goes on the stack again. And this is how the stack works. The stack is first in, last out, or last in, first out. Lasotop River is on the stack in the bottom. When it hits the battlefield, it will amass 1. But I played Jaya's Greeting. Jaya's Greeting targeting the zombie army. It will deal 3 damage, therefore the zombie army will be destroyed. And what happens is this. Jaya's Greeting resolves, because it's the last in, first out. It will do 3 damage to my zombie army. My zombie army is dead. Lasotop River goes back in play. The ability goes on this stack, and you will create a 1/1 zombie army creature. This is a very basic way how the stack works. It is very important if you're playing with your friend and you have difficulty with the stack to stack the cards on each other, the abilities on each other, to know which one resolves first. Let's have some other options. Let's say we want to cast another creature. Let's say I want to cast God Eternal Kefnet. God Eternal Kefnet goes on the stack, always goes on the stack. Let me remove these cards. It goes on the stack, and your opponent has the right to response for your spell. I have tapped my 4 lands. If the opponent does not respond, you have the right to cast the spell. If your opponent, let's say, responds with a counter spell, the counter spell goes on the stack, and you have the right to respond to the counter spell. Let's say you have mana, you have more mana to play. Let's say you have more mana to play. For a scenario, you tap the mana and you play Crush Descent. Crush Descent, counter target spell and its controller plays 2. You put the card on top, This means that the stack has 3 cards. Which card will resolve first? Your card will resolve first because it's the last in, first out. Therefore, Crash the Sand will resolve first. It will counter the counter of your opponent, and God Eternal Kefnet will be in play. This is how the stack works. Your first spell, your opponent second spell, your third spell in response, your spell resolves, you also amass 2, therefore you can put your zombie army in play because you have amass 2. This one is countered, but because the scry goes also on the stack and it can be resolved, this one there's no response and it also resolves. This is how the stack works. Let me give you some other examples. Let's say we have some lands in play and we want to cast again God Eternal Kefnet. I tap to cast God Eternal Kefnet, but the opponent tries to cast Demolish. Demolish is a sorcery and cannot be cast. Therefore, you will cast again God Eternal Kefnet. Let's have another example. Let's say that your opponent plays a Gideon Planeswalker that is on your opponent's side, and you want to respond to Gideon. You want to respond to Gideon with a flash card, which you can play it in your opponent's turn, and you try to tap the lands to play this card. But your opponent casts Demolish. As I said, Demolish can be cast in response, it's a sorcery. Your opponent can tell you before casting the spell, I want to destroy one of your target lands. Even if he plays Demolish, Demolish goes on this deck, he targets one of my land. Demolish cannot be a response to tapping mana. Therefore, you can tap the land before Demolish resolves. As I said, tapping a land, tapping for mana does not go on this deck. You will get your 1 mana. Demolish resolves and destroys the land. You can tap the other 3. You cast the spell on this deck, and that is permissible. At this stage, the opponent can respond. If he or she does not have a response, the spell resolves. That is very basic interactions about this deck. I'm going to show you one last scenario about this deck. Let's say we have Gideon in play. And we want to combat. We go in combat phase. But before combat, your opponent casts the spell Obnixilic's Cruelty. Target creature gets -5/-5 until end of turn. This goes on this deck, and Obnixilic's Cruelty targets my Gideon Blackblade, which is a 4/4 human indestructible, but the -5/-5 will put him in the graveyard. At this stage, in response, I'm going to cast a spell. I'm going to cast Frilled Mystic, which has flash. I'm going to cast it. It goes on this deck. The opponent does not have any mana to respond. He does not respond. It goes in the battlefield. and the ability of Mystics, Frilled Mystics, goes on this deck. Its ability, it is counter target spell. It goes on this deck. It counters Obnixi's Cruelty. My resolves, the ability of Frilled Mystics resolve, Obnixi's Cruelty is countered. It goes into the opponent's graveyard, and you have successfully countered that spell. This is how this deck works. There are multiple scenarios that you can do. If you want, I can give you another scenario, like, let's say your opponent plays Chandra Pyrohelix. It deals 2 damage divided by n1 on 2 targets. It targets my Frilled Mystics. If this resolve, my Frilled Mystics, is dead, in response I put Giant Growth, targeting my Frilled Mystics. My Frilled Mystics get a +3/+3, which is a 6/5. The opponent does not respond to Giant Growth. Giant Growth resolves. This is a 6/5 creature. It deals 2 damage, and your creature is saved. This is how this deck works. As I said, this is not a professional scenario. These are the basic scenario. If you are a professional player, if you have played Magic for a long time, this is quite childish for you. But for a new player, this gives you an idea how this deck works. If you learned something today, you can hit me in the comment below. Here there is a subscription button. Subscribe for my channel for more tutorials, more news about Magic the Gathering and the collectible world.